Hello, dear listeners. Today's episode is on Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, part madcap satire featuring the devil and his retinue, part retelling of a dialogue between Pontius Pilate and Jesus Christ, and part epic love story. The Master and Margarita is widely considered to be one of the best and most widely read Russian novels. We're joined by three-time returning champ Molly Tanzer, who you may remember from her episodes on Jarello Jory and At the Mountains of Madness. And we're also joined by Molly's friend Melissa, a novelist under the pen name MK Sauer. Melissa provides some much-needed political and linguistic context to this novel. As I mentioned a bit in the beginning of this episode, reading Russian novels in translation, while invigorating, can often be difficult due to the amount of cultural information present in the original that may or may not have made it through the translation. Luckily, Melissa is here to provide that, and we discuss the supernatural in this episode, Bulgakov's satirical aims, as well as the enduring power of art. As always, we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Okay, well, we are back with another episode of the Infinite Library podcast. I'm your host, John.
I'm your host, Ben.
And we are here today with two very special guests. Firstly, we have third-time returning champ, Molly Tanzer. Molly, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here again.
And then we have our second guest, Melissa. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and why you're here to talk with us about this particular book?
Yeah, my name is Melissa. I have a degree in Russian literature, an emphasis in early 20th century Russian literature. So basically, I say that my party trick is I can talk about Stalin for 3 hours straight. So I'm here to kind of give you context for the zaniness that is The Master and Margarita. I also am a writer under my pen name MK Sauer.
Wonderful. Well, we could talk more about that at the end when we're doing plugs and all that. But yeah, so like you said, we're here to talk today about Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, one of the stranger works of, I guess we could say, pre-war fiction I've read.
Yeah, this is one that's been on my list for a while. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like a lot of people say this is their favorite book. And so like I had a friend of a friend in undergrad and he was, you got to read this. I read the first chapter where some crazy stuff happens. I'm like, man, that first chapter was crazy. And my friend of a friend was like, it gets way crazier after that. And then I just didn't read the rest of it. So I'm glad that we actually got to it today. And I'm also glad that Melissa is here because I feel like Russian literature has a lot of, and this isn't, I wouldn't say this for every work of Russian literature, but I feel like there's a lot of ones that you read have a lot of culturally specific stuff that's going on. And I like learning about that stuff. So sometimes like I enjoy like looking up secondary sources and whatnot, but some people find it kind of hard in terms of the cultural references that you need. So I'm glad Melissa's here to explain some of them because there's quite a lot in this book about like literary politics, Russian housing arrangements, and other assorted stuff. So glad you're here today, Melissa.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, like you said, Ben, this book, it definitely like starts crazy and just gets crazier. I don't know if we just want to dive right in with the plot or if there's any other kind of sort of preliminary stuff we want to get to. I actually just did have a thought. Ben, you just mentioned kind of the cultural specificity here. And I think there is something with Russian lit compared to like when we read Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out earlier this season, which is a Chinese novel written in like the 90s. Russian literature kind of has this thing where it feels like there's something kind of uncanny about it, I think, a lot of times, where it feels like it should be familiar. There's a certain way in which, it's a Christian culture. It's a somewhat, Western culture. We're familiar with like names and some historical dates in a way that a lot of people in the West like aren't, in terms of like Japanese history or Indian history. And then you read it and it feels familiar, but just a little uncanny. And obviously this is a book that I think is uncanny for a couple other reasons too, but maybe there is something there as well.
It's super interesting that you say that, because defamiliarization is a Russian literary technique. And it's like, there's kind of like a family tree, and you can trace back absurdist Russian literature, which kind of starts with Gogol in the 1820s, is filtered through Dostoevsky in the 1860s, and then definitely lands in Bulgakov in the early 20th century. And so defamiliarization is a technique that a lot of Russian authors use to throw you off your game, to you think you know what they're talking about, but in actuality, they're really like resetting the playing field. And that is to intentionally make you, the reader, like off your guard.
Yeah, I think that that's especially true. I think we'll probably get to talking a little bit more about that when we get to the biblical narrative in this book, because that's something I definitely noticed was the ways that Bulgakov is really kind of trying to make you question a lot of your basic assumptions about what's going on in the narrative through that kind of sub-narrative.
Yeah, and along those lines, I just wanted to add, I remember when, and we don't have to get into this now, but I remember when I first learned about magical realism, we were reading examples from Latin America, and then we read a bunch of Gogol. and almost immediately you're sort of just like, what's going on with magical realism if everyone says it's something that happens in Latin America, but it happens in other places? And I remember my teacher was kind of just like, well, there's other traditions, and then just kind of hand waved. But I think one could talk about the magical realist aspects of this book as well as Gogol. And so I think that like absurdist defamiliarization, we could say not like a trope, it's like a technique, I think is definitely going on there. So yeah.
I also feel like magical realism is one of those terms that when people don't want to call something a fantasy novel for like political or cultural or whatever reasons, like it's both like highly useful and incredibly unused, like the opposite, right? Because it does become too broad, but also I do think it becomes one of those things that people start resisting because like either they're like, no, I write fantasy, or no, I don't write fantasy. And then you have all those negotiations that go along with like, well, what is magical realism as opposed to like fantasy that's set in the real world? And I think it's very interesting that we apply this a lot to Latin America, but you see these traditions everywhere. And honestly, I think a lot of what we would consider to be like fantasy and science fiction today would in a century be one we would be wondering if it fits into these different categories. So I don't know. I'm always very curious when that term comes up, like what the person saying it means has more meaning, I think, than what the term might actually mean, like in the cosmos, apart from the individual's interpretation. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's also feels like it's a category that gets applied, at least in cases of books like this, almost retroactively.
Yeah.
This book was written, I don't know when the term magical realism was coined, but definitely before like fantasy fiction was a like solidified genre in like Western literature. But I definitely would think of this as like a fantasy novel, or in some places even almost a horror novel.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it kind of does not easily take to classification.
yeah.
Certainly. And I don't think Bulgakov, I don't think magical realism, it certainly wasn't in Soviet Union a genre at all. I don't think he would consider himself a magical realist. I think he would just consider himself like more of a dichotomy between like novelist versus playwright. And and that's kind of one of the things that's really interesting about the Master and Margarita too, is because everybody in Russia up until the like late 60s knew him as a playwright from the 20s, as kind of like a weird playwright from the 20s. But then when the Master and Margarita was first published, a heavily censored version in 1966, everybody was just like, oh crap, this guy is like a novelist and a good one too. And it's funny that I think you said that like a lot of people told you that this is their favorite novel. And there's a joke in Russia. It's just like everybody's favorite novel is the Master and Margarita.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's like, yeah, because it is like, it's true. There's a big like tourism industry. You can go on tours of like, I know at least 2 of the places that Bulgakov lived have been turned into museums. You can go on like a tour around Moscow to see all the places in the Master and Margarita. It's super interesting.
Yeah, because my introduction did mention how some of the quotes became sayings. So that's
absolutely.
nice. That's great. There's a saying for it being your favorite book. That's awesome.
I know, it's like a joke. It's like, so what's your favorite book? It's like, oh, the Master and Margarita. It's absolutely that level of like everybody loves that novel. So
it almost kind of reminds me of maybe like the place that Don Quixote has in like Spanish speaking cultures, where it's this obviously like tremendous literary achievement, but it's also like incredibly fun. And so has like a level of accessibility, maybe would be the way to put it, that it really can stand up to popular scrutiny that way.
oh, yeah, for sure. I think if you were to ask all of Russia who their favorite writer is, they would say Pushkin, who's kind of like it's hard. It's not, Shakespeare isn't a good comparison, but the popularity for sure, Pushkin is way up there. But yeah, I don't know that there's like an American equivalent for Bulgakov, and like
I can't think of one myself. I was trying to think of what an equivalent might be, and I can't. Again, I can think of authors this book reminds me of,
absolutely,
but no one who is like has that level of like popularity. I guess we might as well just kind of get into the book itself, because I feel like there's a lot here to talk about. So we open at a place called Patriarch's Pond, which I get the impression is kind of a somewhat ritzy neighborhood and like post-revolution Russia. I feel like the novel isn't super specific on exactly when it's set, which probably also has to do with how long this book took to be written. There is like kind of a timelessness that I noticed, but maybe I was not picking up on things.
Patriarch's Pond is the patriarch. It gets its name from like the Pope of the Russian Orthodox Church is called the Patriarch, right? And so that's where it gets its name from. It's a pretty beautiful place. I've never been personally, but pictures that I have seen. This novel, if you were a Russian reader, you would peg it immediately as taking place mostly in the late 1930s during the height of the Stalinist purges. You would be like, oh yeah, this is where this novel is set at.
Okay. Interesting. Well, that does definitely sharpen some things into focus. So thank you for that clarification. We just kind of start watching something I'm sure all of us have been in before. Two ostensible writers talking about how God isn't real.
Right. It's such a great opening too, because they're like immediately having an argument, but the chapter is called "Never Talk to Strangers," and what do you know? A mysterious professor shows up. So,
a foreigner who seems to have an uncanny ability with Russian, who intrudes on their conversation. And Ben, when we were talking a little bit earlier, you pointed out how he immediately offers them their preferred brand of cigarettes.
Well, yeah, he's like, oh, like you probably don't have, I think it's called R brand. And then like he takes out like, I think it's like a kind of gaudy cigarette case. And what do you know? He has R brand. And it's just a nice bit of sort of like, oh, this is working out too well. I also want to point out that I love that in this opening bit, they're talking about how God isn't real. And we don't know, I guess, exactly that this mysterious figure is Satan, but I like that Satan is real. And I thought it's interesting that that's kind of the reality. And like, obviously this becomes more revealed as it goes on, but like this mysterious man, Woland, is sort of like Satan or is Satan. And like that is taken completely seriously. And then the other stuff, I guess we can get into whether or not it's serious, but like the reality of Satan is like one of the number one things. And I think that's like an interesting, like, establishing from the first chapter. So
I was definitely struck in this first section kind of by, I feel like Bulgakov is kind of getting his core thesis kind of laid out right here at the beginning, where you have these two people who are totally convinced, by sort of the rationalistic project of the Soviet state. God is not real. In fact, Jesus Christ was not even a real historical figure, totally mythological. And then the devil shows up and is not just the devil, but like I almost imagine him with like the classic like pointy goatee and like the most like cartoonish depiction of the devil you could possibly imagine, who isn't holding like a pitchfork. And he, just shows up and is like, "Hey, guess what? I'm real," and proceeds to, turn all of Muscovite society on its head for, from what I could tell, a good couple months.
Yeah.
Is it like a week though? Isn't it?
It is.
I think it's
Oh,
only
it's a
1
week.
week.
Okay.
Yeah, I hit that line. I think it's towards the end that it's like the week that they were there, and I was like, oh, like that makes this even more unhinged on some way, because like the time pressure of this narrative, that like all of these things happened in such a short span of time, I thought was like a really interesting thing that I hadn't realized as I was reading. And then when they said it, I had this weird moment where I was like, what a week. Like we've all had them, but like I feel like that revelation was one of the most startling in the end.
It's even less than a week. It starts on a Wednesday afternoon and it ends Sunday morning.
Oh my God.
Oh wow.
And that has to do with to do with the Passover and like the Easter theme.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Holy Week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah,
Oh,
It does feel much longer though, because I think there's a lot of like character juggling that this book does, and I think it does make it feel like a longer span of time, even if it's only Wednesday to Sunday.
They're certainly experiencing it as a long span of time, but I don't know. Like it's interesting to think how like unhinged it must be like for the people in this, where like like it. Can you imagine? I mean, like there's been one of the things Melissa and I were talking about when we were talking about this book a little bit is like how relevant this book feels now, especially with like politics. But when I think, without getting too much into it, as this is not the topic of the podcast, there have been weeks this year that have felt much longer than 1 week because of the pressure of all the weirdness in the news. And that kind of occurred to me too, where like when you're hearing about all of these things, and imagine being someone who's like not even involved in this plot, but you're just hearing all these rumors circulating around from that time, or it's in the news or it's in the newspaper. And, the time dilation where it feels so much longer has definitely been happening to me in terms of the unhinged nature of reality right now.
Yeah.
So that really struck me as well.
I mean, you have the classic Lenin quote, weeks where decades happen and decades where weeks happen. And feels like we've definitely had a lot more of the former lately than the latter.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's a big part of the defamiliarization too, is that Bulgakov is always playing with time. He's always playing with like very interesting phrasing for what you expect Jesus to be called Jesus, but he's not. He's called Yeshua. And so that's a big part of it, is like he'll tell you one, like the most unreliable narrator will tell you one thing, and then it's just like, no kidding, I wasn't joking. Like I was joking about that. So I think that it's the nail on the head for sure.
I was going to say, and we should mention, one of the things that happens is the professor basically tells a firsthand account of a story that involves Pontius Pilate and Jesus. However, as you were saying, Jesus is called Yeshua, and there's other slight things, name differences that happen in this story. And so one of the first things that happens is that the professor, Satan, was basically like, I was there. I saw all this happen. And the two, the poet and the editor, the two literary guys are like, that doesn't make any sense. You're crazy. And basically in a move that he does much frequently in the book, Satan professor says essentially like, you don't even know when your own death is going to be. And he basically gives him the circumstances of his death, which involve spilling and getting his head hit by a train, I think, right? Yeah.
Not even just hit, decapitated.
Decapitated by a train. And what do you know? That exactly happens after Professor gives us the story of Yeshua, and they disagree with him. That immediately happens, and people are predictably freaked out by this. The poet is, and everyone who sees it happen, basically at the train station.
Yeah, well, and you said he's an editor, Ben. So this guy's name is Berlioz, the guy who dies. He is one of the bigwigs at Massilit, which is the professional association of like Moscow writers.
It's an acronym for Masovnaya Literaturna, which is like, so as I'm sure you're aware, in Soviet culture, they would always make these crazy acronyms for everything. And so Massilit sounds really funny in Russian. It's like if we called a very serious literary society like Lotsa Lit, like it's funny sounding.
Yeah, and Bulgakov, I feel like Masalit is definitely where Bulgakov kind of starts a lot of the satirical elements in this, because it is ostensibly an association of writers, but no one seems to do very much writing. It's much more about social climbing and eating at nice restaurants.
Yeah, and trying to get the good vacation spots. There's a part where they're arguing about like the writers' retreat, like, and they're like, I really hope I end up here, but everybody loves that vacation spot, so I'm not going to get the right one. But
The more things change.
Yeah, and basically the poet sees this event happen. This Berlioz, the editor, slips in a puddle of sunflower seed oil, trips, falls, and is immediately decapitated by a tram. Unsurprisingly, this drives our young poet friend somewhat insane. He rushes off and like goes and tells like the rest of this professional association what happens, and that's kind of our inciting incident for the rest of the plot. Such as there is a plot.
yeah, a lot of the stuff that happens remind me like a little bit of the Picaresque, because it'll be like, now we're in this social situation and we're following the devil Woland as he gets set up in Russia, and he interacts with various characters, and like we return to Homeless, or the poet who goes by the name of Homeless. So it's not like we're dropped the complete plot, but there's a kind of like one thing after another ness of this plot that I appreciate, as well as the Pontius Pilate story, which gets picked up later. As we'll get into.
Yeah, it's funny that, so what Bulgakov is doing here is he's intentionally making fun of a certain type of Soviet author when we're talking about Бездомный, or Homeless is how his name is translated. He's making fun of a certain type of author that chose specifically sort of like derogatory names. And so the most famous would be Maxim Gorky. And Gorky's last name means bitter. And he intentionally chose that name because he wanted to talk about like the bitterness of life. Gorky is kind of a contemporary of Bulgakov, so he was writing during the Russian Empire and then under the Soviet Union as well. Gorky was very much more in line with Soviet ideals, at least in the beginning. But so Bulgakov is making fun of like there was Gorky and there were a few others.
Homeless.
Yeah, homeless. And so, but that's a big part of it. But he's making fun of him in regards to sort of his uneducated way. If you compare him to Berlioz, who's actually very quite educated, the difference there is interesting because of how Woland or Satan treats both of them. So he treats Berlioz very contemptuously, and it ends up with Berlioz dying, versus like how he treats Ivan or Бездомный is very interesting. And that'll kind of give you a clue as to like the powers that Satan has and who he protects and who he destroys.
Well, it's interesting because Homeless also like basically spontaneously like undergoes a conversion based on this experience. He goes and baptizes himself in the river. And he starts dressing like Tolstoy.
Not only that, he gets a picture of, what is it called?
An icon.
In Russian, an icon, yeah. And Russian Orthodoxy icons are like little saints, and you would have one in the room of your house. You'd walk into the main foyer of your house, and you would have one on the top left-hand corner, and that would kind of either be like your saint that you worshipped or the saint that you felt most in touch with. And so he has an icon which is explicitly religious in an era in 1930s Russia where atheism was the go-to. You weren't supposed to be religious. Religion had kind of been trying to be tamped out by Lenin and especially Stalin.
Yeah, and like we can talk about the Pontius Pilate Yeshua story later, but I like in Bulgakov choosing to retell it a certain way. I feel like he focuses on the like philosophical and like humanistic aspects of Jesus, as opposed to say the like divinity or the religious ones in the retelling. And I thought that was an interesting choice because I feel like you were saying, it wasn't exactly culturally acceptable. And in retelling it, he decides to focus on those aspects where it's like, yeah, this stuff is still important and we shouldn't disregard it, especially if Satan is real. But at the same time, like there's still like morality messages here that are useful and that get told as that story progresses in tandem with everything else. So.
Well, it's interesting because there is a twist later in the book regarding the Pontius Pilate narrative that does, I think, actually kind of recast that a little bit. But I feel like we should save that.
Yeah.
We haven't quite lined up all our pieces there yet. So
I know this is such a hard book to talk about.
It is.
Like, I was thinking about that as I was sort of getting ready for this, where it's like, well, how will we even structure this conversation? Because like, it's like, oh, we don't want to talk about that yet. And it's like, but how, it's like such an interesting novel that you have to talk about everything to talk about one single piece, which I think is really interesting factor of it. And like, I was also thinking about it in terms of like the craft of it, where like, what is structure? What is plot? This guy, there's also like one of the things I always like to harp on and on about is like rules don't matter. And like, there was some part that I was like, look at this man just head hopping all over the place.
Yeah,
like everyone is like, has their fingers shaken at them so much these days about like, don't do these things. And like, here we have this book, which basically breaks every single rule that we would ever tell anyone if you would read like a list of writing rules, and like, here they are. And so it is such an unhinged experience to like read through it. Just in terms of like having to keep everything in your head and seeing what he's doing, and like the sort of and the way that it sort of comes back around to our homeless poet at the end, I thought was like a really interesting place to end the novel as well, where I was like, people make an argument about like where you end a book is like whose story it is, which is like, is that true for this? I'm not even sure about that. Like, I would not necessarily consider it to be his story, but yet he is our first and last person. And so like the way this book ties itself together, I just think is one of the things that really kept me going through it, even when I found some of the parts tough, because I am not, I don't know anything about what this book is about. And I could definitely point my finger and be like, I know he's talking about something here, and I'm probably going to learn on this podcast. So I'm not going to like break my spell right now and look it up. But it was just sort of like, where are we headed with this? And then it was like, oh, we're back to this spot. So I don't know. That's
Well, I think it's really interesting, like the book is called The Master and Margarita, and we don't meet either of those characters until nearly halfway through the text. And, they take up a lot of the narrative space once they arrive. But until then, we're following really kind of just random characters throughout the story. We do kind of have the structure of this literary association and of the Devil's Retinue. But, there is like definitely a strangeness here in terms of how it's built. And like you said, Molly, this is a book that if you told somebody you were writing a book like this, they would tell you like, you're never going to get that published, especially if you also like appended it with like, oh, and I've been working on it for 20 years and this is the state it's in.
Never listen to anyone. A good lesson. Yeah.
Molly, you had brought up like him writing this, and I feel like some of the ways that he makes the Pontius Pilate story work with the social satire, but then also he apparently spent a really long time on the ending as well. I think he was like really concerned with like putting them together in a way that suited the story that he wanted to tell, and not necessarily like, I don't know, must do this, must have like a second act drama or something, like whatever rules you might want to ascribe to. And like, I think the head hopping thing is interesting because like my first read through it was like, I was like, where is this going? And then when there's a chapter that's called like Our Hero Enters, and like, that's when the master gets introduced. I'm like, oh, okay. Like suddenly things are kind of like snapping into focus, but it is almost like it's surprising in a way that I think like is compelling in terms of keeping you reading. So yeah.
It's funny that like you would say that if somebody were to write this today, they would never get published, because that was Bulgakov his entire life. Like, the man unfortunately wrote a series of like novelettes, his most famous being The Heart of a Dog, which if you like The Master and Margarita, you will probably enjoy The Heart of a Dog because it's as zany as The Master and Margarita, but much shorter. And writing The Heart of a Dog is what got him in massive trouble. I think he was by like 1925 unable to get anything published in the Soviet Union because he had published a scathing satire of Soviet society in The Heart of a Dog. So much so that he wanted to emigrate from Russia. He wanted to leave because he didn't think he could get work there anymore. And then he gets a call from Stalin himself, telling him like, it's like, please hold for Comrade Stalin. And so like Bulgakov like sits down in his kitchen. There's a part in The Master Margarita that is very similar to the call that Bulgakov gets from Stalin, in that somebody is getting a call and he has to sit down and his wife is just like, you like put on your slippers while you talk to, the character in the novel is talking to the secret police. But when Bulgakov was talking to Stalin, Stalin basically told him, like, you won't be happy if you leave Russia.
Wow.
So I'll make sure that you get a job. And the very next day, he was promoted to some big position at the Moscow theater because of Stalin directly. And so he like never was able to get works published, like what he truly wanted to write. He was kind of always under self-censorship and massive censorship from the government as well. So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're reading The Master and Margarita, is that he never knew, he always hoped it would be able to get published, but he kind of, I think in his heart of hearts, knew that it would never get published while he was alive. But he always felt sort of this crushing defeat that he had kind of wasted his life because nobody was going to appreciate him in his own time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's like a fascinating story, and I think we'll get, again. I know I keep saying this. We'll get to it, but there's definitely a lot of like that in the narrative. The fact that this was like being written while he's undergoing all these various travails is fascinating. But it's so interesting. Again, just there's almost a way in which he was unwillingly like kind of making a deal with the devil in a sense. And it's really strange because again, it's like clearly Stalin liked him to some degree.
He wrote a play called In the Days of the Turbines. He turned into a novel called The White Guard. And it was one of Stalin's favorite plays. I think Stalin saw it upwards of 30 times.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's this weird thing where it's like the Stalin, like, the guy like likes your work, but you can't get past the censors. Like even he can't kind of cut through all this bureaucracy for you and get you what you really want, but he can get you a cush job, running some theater.
It was a job.
There were worse jobs you could have in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of speaks to some of the targets of the satire, because like we don't have to talk about all of them, but if there's any one you wanted to bring up, because I think in this section where Homeless goes back to Maslet, we get like there's like the petty tyranny of like the guy who's in charge of the housing arrangements. There is the critique of like foreign currency speculation and how you're not supposed to have foreign currency. You're supposed to use only Russian currency. And like he sort of targets like, petty fraud, corruption, like small-minded tyranny, but he's not exactly placing a satirical aim on like the government. And maybe he does that in other stuff, but I still think that's worthy of social critique. But I like wonder if like there's like his sort of satire works in a different register, and that like some people enjoy it other than like anti-government satire. We don't have to necessarily go there, but I think I was noticing that like, yeah, as he makes fun of these characters and like Satan basically causes problems for them, it's like, yeah, like stuff that should be otherwise. Like people shouldn't hoard housing arrangements. People shouldn't like, I guess you can speculate in foreign currency, but it's like that, like you shouldn't be greedy. So I don't know. There's like something there in terms of his like satirical aims, at least in like this section before, say, like the major characters get introduced. So
he really displaces a lot of the terror that was happening in the 1930s, especially like 37 through 38, it was called the Great Purges. And so Stalin basically, anybody who had quote unquote counter-revolutionary ties, like if you had fought for the whites in the Russian Civil War, if you had been part of the bourgeois, if you had been any sort of unwanted element, at that time it was called the NKVD, but it was like a precursor to the KGB, would come and arrest you. And if you weren't, and that happens to the master, it happens to a lot of people, but the master specifically is arrested. And that it's never explicitly said in the Moscow chapters, but in the Pontius Pilate chapters, that's where Bulgakov displaces a lot of the terror from the Soviet Union. And so like all of the violence in Moscow chapters is very cartoony and it doesn't stick around. Whereas all of the actual violence of people being arrested, interrogated, beaten, and executed is displaced into the Pontius Pilate chapters. And so he's doing a very specific thing here, which is, again, that defamiliarization. But it's once again channeling his Dostoevsky, because he's balancing the sacred and the profane, which is something that Dostoevsky did a lot. Bulgakov is doing it with like the Pontius Pilate chapters and the Moscow chapters. So any sort of the violence that happens against people that was happening in real life in the Soviet Union happens to Yeshua, happens to Levi Mietve, happens to everybody in those Pontius Pilate chapters.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that until you brought that up, but that makes total sense. Like Rat Slayer in the Pontius Pilate chapter is like the state terror instrument, and we actually like refer to him torturing Yeshua. But yeah, in the standard stuff, it's all like, well, and then he was gone for a while, and then he came back, and it's like, yeah, he was arrested. Like it's talked around, so that's great. Yeah. Is
it self-censorship? Is it like, did he try to make this smooth this over because he knew? It's hard to say like if Bulgakov would have had more specific elements of arrests and the terror in the Moscow chapters had he not been under intense scrutiny.
Yeah, and the arrest portion, like Molly, you'd brought up like, current politics, and like you said, we don't have to get into it, but I feel like there are definitely some parallels there between talking around what's happening as well as just like that kind of thing. So yeah, that's definitely a parallel there. So
yeah, I was definitely having a lot of thoughts, especially because I was finishing this book up this week, and some of the news items of this week, even that, I was just sort of like, this is a wild, because when I started reading this, because people who listen to this podcast may remember the last time I was on, I was saying, oh, I picked up Master and Margarita, and that's one of the reasons we were like, oh, we should read that next year. And I had to put it down to read for the World Fantasy Award, and then I came back to it. But the first part of me reading it was pre-election, and then I came back to it now. And so it was like, speaking of disorientation, right? Like when I was reading those initial chapters last year, I was like, oh man, yeah, that's Soviet society. Like they want their shoes. That's so hypocritical. Right. Like, and I had this sort of different relationship to it, to reading it now, where I was just like, all right, yeah, okay. Like, interesting. I guess this is far too relevant now. I hate this. And I love it, but it's just so different. And with sort of like the policing aspects and sort of all of the things that have been going on, I was thinking about like what Bulgakov is doing and what he felt able to do. I think is a really interesting part of this book. And I love that sort of displacement thing that we were talking about with the Pontius Pilate chapters, because I'm not quite sure that I got that when I was first reading it. And now I'm just sort of like, oh, like it is such an unhinged novel with so many different things, but they all tie together in this really interesting way, that he's sort of making them work. And the fact that there's sort of this sort of resistance urge within it while sort of working within what is acceptable, I think is going to be one of the things that we'll probably see emerging in our own contemporary literature. Like when people come back and, if there's still podcasts and however many years or whatever we're doing in the future, beaming our thoughts into each other's brains, I think, will be very interesting to see that sort of criticism, or not criticism, but like critique, like, and how we're looking at how people are saying what they're saying. I think is going to have a sad but interesting resurgence.
And that's making me think of, I don't remember which character is, but that guy has that dream of being interrogated. And
Nicanor Ivanovich.
Yeah. And even in that section, it's like, he's like at a game show, and like the announcer is like looking in the audience and like looking at him and being like, what do you think? Like, tell us the truth. And even that is like you were saying, it's working within it in this like sort of uncanny dream. It reminded me a lot of the Orson Welles, The Trial, where like, if anyone's seen that movie, where like the Perkins like walks into the room and all these adults just start laughing at him for no reason. And it's like this like really uncanny, like everyone's having a conversation about me and I don't know what's going on. I think that describes the vibe you were talking about. And that's like in that dream, I think it's about, is he the character that stole the foreign currency, i.e. Satan, like put it there? I think it's that character, but yeah, anyway, that's working within stuff, I think is definitely what's going on in this book. So
yeah, definitely. I definitely think that there's something there as well in terms of kind of the ways in which the ways in which, like, again, the contemporary, I guess that's the word I'll use, the contemporary narrative, like so many of the characters are so concerned with petty things, like, again, one of my favorite bits is the part about the guy who lives in Kyiv, who is like desperate to go get his nephew who's died his apartment because there's such a housing shortage in Moscow that you can't just like pack up and move there. You have to go through this like incredibly Byzantine process of like applying for an apartment there. And so the best way to get one is to have someone you're related to who lives in Moscow die so you can get the apartment. Or again, you know, the literary critics who or not critics, but the literary writers who are so concerned about like, yeah, what resort am I going to for the writers' retreat this year? And meanwhile, again, in the background, we know the literal devil is doing Looney Tunes hijinks in the background, but also, yeah, the Stalinist purges are happening as well.
Honestly, when you put it like that, it is a crazy novel. Like just describing it's like, oh yeah, this is going on, and also Satan's wandering around. The Stalinist purges are in the background. Like all of these petty things are happening. There's the Pontius Pilate Jesus narrative. Yeah, it's like it's crazy.
But I mean, like, it's so interesting too, because like, I mean, we keep having these conversations, I think, at least I know I do in my personal life of like, oh, well, you know, the world is crumbling and everything is going crazy, but I still have to go to my job, or I still have to do my taxes, or I still have to apply. I mean, especially it's, you know, this past weekend was the Hugo Awards, Worldcon in Seattle. And I saw a lot of conversation leading up to that about like what, you know, who can go now, especially given it is a world con, but how much of the world is able to come to America right now to attend this world con? And not only that, but like a lot of conversations about like, what am I doing flying to Seattle to talk about science fiction and fantasy when all these terrible things are happening? Or like, you know, and other people are still having to apply for residencies. They're still having to apply for grants. They're still having to do all of these things. And so on one hand, all of the like lit characters are just so irritating, right? And but I found myself having a bit of sympathy for them because like here, you know, in literary circles, like that's still happening. Like there is this like petty squabbling there, you know, the big fight we had about Worldcon, like, oh, they used AI to vet their participants. Like that is bad, full stop, period. No, but, no, if, no, and. However, all these other things are happening, and like this is what we're tweeting and skeeting about. It's just so interesting. So I actually felt a little bit more empathy for them when I came back to this book than I did when I was reading it last year. Because like, yeah, man, like it does suck out there. It's always going to suck out there. But sometimes you just have to figure out like what apartment you're going to live in. And like the absurdity of that, I think is one of the most powerful things in this book, where like, yeah, all these things are happening, but you still have to figure out if your fish is second grade or first grade fresh, man. Like, you don't want to eat it. Like, you still have to eat. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I also like that they throw that they start partying when they find out Berlioz has died. Like they just have like a huge rager, and I feel like that kind of like juxtaposition is like important too. Where it's like I'm still alive, like I'm still alive even though Berlioz is dead. I should be sad, but we're gonna have like a swinging jazz band play all night, basically. Like it's like. And that's how we'll remember him, as well as kind of being a little selfish. But that's just how it goes. Like, yeah. So
I want to take like a little bit of a detour here because I feel like we still haven't talked about one of the best parts of the book, and that is the devil and all his wacky sidekicks and henchmen.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that. Yeah.
You know, I definitely want to Molly, you know, I know you've written a lot about demons in your own work, and I'm very curious to kind of hear your thoughts about the way Bulgakov employs like demonic forces in this book. But I just really love the way that he portrays these figures, because they are just cartoon characters. Like there's literally like, basically Behemoth is like Felix the cat, you know. It's
and there's so many bits with him like putting on little glasses, or him like eating, or like there's like he has him do so many like just comedic actions while he's like describing a cat doing him. It's great.
Yeah, I definitely agree with this novel that it is probably a bad idea to give a cat a firearm. I think like that's one thing that we could like. I loved that scene where he's just like, I can do that too, and it's just like he's the best shot in the place, but then ends up like shooting Hella and like doing all these terrible things, and it's just like,
and like doesn't he shoot the owl too? There's just like an owl there.
Like, I don't know, like I think he gets cats very right, which is interesting because I've read did not finish it, but I've read Heart of a Dog, and I thought that he really got like dogs right as well. So I I am sort of fascinated by Bulgakov's relationship with animals in the animal world, because we do see them show up a lot in this, and he does seem to find like a fascination with them, which I think is really interesting. But Behemoth is my favorite of the demons.
He says at one point, the cat says nobody has ever, I think, spoken familiarly to a cat before. Because like you were saying before the show, Melissa, that like in Russian society, you address each other more formally until you become friends. And he's like, nobody has addressed the cat informally or something, which I thought was like a very funny bit. But yeah,
it's the same in Spanish. So like if you have a formal and an informal you. So in Russian, it's "ты," which is you, the informal, and "вы," which is the very formal. So Behemoth is talking about, I think it's somebody does, but they're saying "вы." They're being very polite to him, and he's just like, "Oh, a cat like me? No one's ever been so very nice, so polite to me."
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so we have Behemoth the cat. We have Azazello, which great name.
And he's like kind of like a bandit, sort of sharpshooter, kind of. I think how would we describe him?
I heard him described as a hitman a lot, which I found to be charming. But he's like, wall-eyed. I think he's described. He's like spectacles, but like one is like blacked out or broken or something.
That's Koroviev.
Oh, it's Koroviev. That's right. Yeah. Who I don't remember what his like physical description is. He's the one who like is always wearing like a fancy like waistcoat, right?
Scary. Like, I think he's the scariest, honestly, of all of them. Like Koroviev, whenever he showed up, I was always just like, all right, like we'll see how this goes. Like, I don't know, like, but I don't know why he put the spook on me more than all the other.
Well, he's very like obsequious and sort of cheery, even though like something bad is about to happen. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that guy.
Koroviev would be especially familiar to Russian readers because it's another Dostoevsky reference, like from the brothers Karamazov, when the middle brother Ivan hallucinates the devil. Koroviev looks like the devil that Ivan hallucinates.
Well, is that the section where the devil is basically like the in-law that you like shows up randomly when you don't want the in-laws to show up, and like he keeps asking like your food is bad, can I sleep on your like on your couch, and like that's like the devil hallucination is just like this annoying in-law. That's awesome. I didn't know that was related. That's great.
It's overly familiar. Yeah, he's intentionally channeling the devil from the brothers Karamazov.
Yeah, it's such a great devil depiction because he's just like the in-law that shows up when you least expect it, and you have to put him up, and you're just annoyed, and like Ivan is having like a seizure headache or something. Like he's Anyway, that's great. I didn't know that was a reference.
Yep.
Yeah, and then there's Hella, who's the one girl, and definitely I think it's the least to do, unfortunately.
Yeah, I kind of wanted her to have more. I mean, she was great, and I appreciated all the ways that she showed up, but I guess my desires were to see more of her because I was interested in sort of what she was up to when other people were sort of more on the page. But I have to say my actual favorite moment in the entire novel is like at the end where all of them are unmasked and their true forms are revealed. Yeah. I was like, not cool. I was just like, this is the best part of this book. Like when we see them and who they are and I don't know. I just found that to be like one of like in terms of I love sort of the depiction of the diabolic and the devilish, and that sort of when everything falls away and the reality of the world after all of this unreality, and it's like even spookier. I was just like, that is like such a profoundly quiet, interesting moment. I felt after like a lot of like you said, like Looney Tune, like, but like, all the sort of like over here, over this, like yuck, yuck, yuck. And then it's like, oh, that's actually very touching and scary. And in a book that has a lot of presence of the infernal, but not actually a lot of presence of the divine, there is a sort of like numinousness to that moment that I thought like really, really like spectacular. I felt like such a nice little, like when you've saved the last little chocolate in the box of them that you like the best, and then you get that one and you're like, oh, so I don't know. I loved that part.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I really thought, and I don't know how I'm sure a lot of this is Bulgakov. I don't know how much of it is the translation as well, but like I thought the quality of the prose like just shot up so much in that last, I don't know if it's the last chapter, but in that section, like it's just so poetic and beautiful, while still taking on, still like having like a sense of humor about it too. They call Behemoth like the best clown in the world.
Yeah. Like he's like a punk character kind of. Yeah. It's the moonlight changes them into their like true form. It's very moving. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, just really, really beautiful. Like some of the best, like genuinely like some of like the best, I think, fantasy writing I've read in recent memory. Really, really wonderful. I'm struggling to like find more to say about it because it's just.
I know it was just so good. Like,
yeah, it really felt like the point in the book where I don't know if I want to say like everything was leading to that, but like that section made all the prior stuff totally worth it. Like it had that effect because of all the prior material. And it really just made it hit home really, really strong.
I think it's also a good way to kind of like shift registers, because I feel like in comic novels usually like it's like eventually the jokes just stop, or like in Don Quixote it's like Don Quixote dies, versus like suddenly we're in this more just like, you know, humanistic kind of like numinous sort of supernatural in a way that kind of changes the register as opposed to just like the jokes stopping, which like they kind of do. But I don't know. I think like that's really important to kind of like the shape of the book, despite it, as we were saying, it kind of being, you know, not all over the place, but a bit kind of like one thing after another. So,
well, it's madcap.
Madcap.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said the word masks, because that's a major theme of this novel is who's wearing a mask and when they're wearing masks, because that's what the crux here of, if you pay attention to who tells lies and who's telling the truth, that's a big theme. And so in Soviet society, there was a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of doublethink about what people said and what they did. And you had to have this because you couldn't actually say your inner thoughts, because the chances of you getting arrested went up spectacularly. And so you kind of would have a mask that you would wear in society. And then you would have like your private mask that you would wear at home. And who, like the masks that people wear and when they take them off, you'll notice that like Woland, the entire time, he's never described kind of the same way. But the only time he's wearing a mask is during the black magic expose at the Variety Theater.
Yeah.
And so that, like the idea that you needed to expose people, you needed to expose their inner thoughts, their true feelings, whether or not they had foreign currency, was a major thing that people did in Soviet Russia, is because they were always informing on one another. They're always, you know, having to inform on their friends, their relatives. And so the idea that the Soviet society at that time was obsessed with unmasking people. And so that's what that chapter is really about. The Black Magic chapter is Woland himself is wearing a mask, but that's the only time that he is. But everybody else is sort of wanting to, they're enchanted by this black magic. But then the one guy in the audience is like, well, you got to tell us how you did it. Like, that's the important part. That's what I paid money for, because they were so obsessed with exposing everything that people were saying. And so later on, when the moonlight, you know, unmasks Koroviev and Behemoth and everybody, it's another point where you just kind of have everybody shifting personalities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was very interested in kind of, again, the diabolical elements in this novel and the way that they really, it feels like it's harkening back to like some very like old style, like demonic ideas where it's like, oh, the devil is a liar. The devil is all about illusions and about appearances. You know, particularly in the black magic expose, where it's so much about just illusion, but it's an illusion that does not have an easy solution outside of the devil is doing it with magic. You know, and even the ways in which, you know, they entice these nice women with beautiful dresses and shoes and then make them disappear and drive the crowd into a frenzy that way. You know, and the ways in which even when Margarita like kind of joins the devil and his retinue later in the novel, you know, it's always kind of through this method of granting her like a new identity, like as a witch or as the devil's queen. But she always kind of is remaining herself underneath, even if maybe that new identity does actually align more with her true self than kind of the identity she had kind of in society before that point. So I think there's something there about kind of the power that illusion can provide to people. And yeah, that's, I guess, what art is, if we want to get real, real facile about it.
Well, but I think that's important to the book, because we should mention Master and Margarita, but one of the reasons Master is because he wrote a novel, and he's writing the Pontius Pilate Yeshua stuff that we're reading. In a move that is still, I think I'm wrapping my head around a little bit, because like I guess Woland was there, but then he's also like read the book. Maybe we can come back to that, but I think like his ability, like his character as a writer, I think is important. So I think like, yeah, like you were saying, John, the illusions giving people things that they lack, I think that's definitely a part of it. And Woland actually, so at one point the Master burns his manuscript and Woland gives it back to him in sort of like a restoration. So I think like the devil is sort of like a creative devil, and I think he values that even, so I don't know. I don't think it's facile, John. I think it's related to what the book's doing, but
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
There's a moment where the Master is talking to Woland at the very end of the book, and he says, like, I didn't guess it. I just knew it happened. And so it raises the idea, is art like this divine inspiration? Does a muse come down and, strike lightning into the writer's brain? Would this Pontius Pilate novel had always been written by somebody? It just happened to have the Master be its chosen vessel through which it comes into our world. And so Woland is sort of like this gateway, almost, is very fascinating. But it's important that like he gets his manuscript back because of the Faustian deal that Margarita makes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not the Master.
Well, and we should probably talk about Margarita. Because I feel like the last piece of the character.
Yeah, like I said, so we don't actually meet Margarita until part 2. So a little over halfway through the book, at least by my page count. And we're introduced to her by reputation first, because the Master, we meet him in the insane asylum where the poet Homeless is sent to after his mental breakdown. And the Master tells Homeless about his great love and how he basically spurned her after he felt like he'd failed in his career, and it drove him insane.
Yeah.
And so we know that there is this great love. We aren't told a ton about her, aside from that, she and the poet were deeply in love. And then we're introduced to her here in the second part. And she is someone who I like the way it's framed. It's like she had married a man who had invented something for the state. And so they're very comfortable, but she is obscenely bored.
Very unhappy. Yeah.
Yeah. She's, I think, 30 years old, and just really does not see she's completely unhappy and bored with her life. And she clearly still holds a lot of love for the Master, despite having married someone else, someone more practical. And so she's in luck when a bunch of demons show up and offer to let her become a witch.
In order to save the Master, right? I think that do they present that to her? I can't remember.
Yes. Okay. It's Azazela who's just like, oh, you can help. You'll get a wish. We'll grant you anything that you desire.
That's what it is.
If you help us.
Yeah. And so Anazello gives her this cream that she puts on that basically, turns her into a witch, and she can fly. And then her maid, Natasha, also does this. And then I can't remember the character that turns into a pig. But there's also
their neighbor, kind of their boorish neighbor.
Yeah, their boorish neighbor turns into a pig. So there's a sequence in which Margarita is naked flying a broom, followed by Natasha, who is flying a pig, and they go kind of flying off into the night to do diabolical hijinks and meet Satan for what we don't know, but we find out later is like a ball. sort of like demonic midnight ball. And also along the way, Margarita destroys this horrible critic's apartment, which is a scene that I particularly enjoyed because the critic basically dunked on the Master's book before it came out. I think maybe I can't remember if there was some negative press. Basically, she destroys his apartment. It's awesome. And then they like fly off into the night. And like, that's when the book like had been supernatural, but I feel like it like full lift off in terms of like supernatural, like diabolical stuff at that point. So
I was just saying, like, her attack on the critics apartment building was like, I just felt like it was one of those moments, like, as a writer, right, where it's like criticism happens, like good reviews, bad reviews, like whatever, like you're supposed to, and like, you know, we tell writers all, like, never respond to your reviewers, like don't let it get to you. Like, I don't even read Goodreads reviews, right, because like they're always unhinged, and like I don't want to know, I don't need them to like my book. But anyway, like,
Molly, we refer to Goodreads as bad reads on this podcast. But anyway, continue.
Bad takes, right? Like, and so, you know, but you know, you have to come to terms with it. You have to come to terms with it. Critics will be there, and they have this right to do that. And so I was like, you know, all of these years of my life of being like, no, like they're allowed. And then I was like, get them. Like, I was just like, get their asses, Margarita. Like, and I just having such a good time with it, where it was like, this is probably everything that's wrong in the world, but I don't care. Like, just like, yes, make their toilets overflow, like crush their windows, like make their dogs howl. Like, I had a lot of fun with that chapter, and I was like, I feel like maybe there's some writerly revenge happening here. I don't know this man, but I'm gonna say right now that I feel like he's having a great time with this scene in particular, and so it felt very liberating in the way that she feels liberated. It was also a very like, it's okay to want bad things. Go ahead. Like, it's fine. Like, we're entering the realm of the infernal on these bargains. So like, yeah, like get them. And I had a wonderful time with that chapter.
Definitely. You know, I think that it's really fascinating, you know, again, like the way that like witchcraft becomes, I mean, this is not like a new idea, but like witchcraft becomes this way of expressing like unconscious desire. And all of a sudden, like, she is free to let loose all these things that she's been bottling up inside of herself. And she's even like, I think the cream even like de-ages her slightly, so that she's basically the same age that she was like when she took this like different path in her life. You could also read it as kind of like, oh, she was an old maid at 30. Now she's a hot 20-something again, but I'm choosing to read it the other way.
Well, but she also gets like a squint, and like, you know, like, sure, her eyebrows suddenly become like ferocious, and, you know, so like it is interesting. Like, she does become like luminous, but also like, I do think she also discards some of the niceties of being like the woman that she needed to be. Like, I mean, if you know, eyebrows are one of those things that always fascinate me in terms of like styling and like what they are doing at certain points in time, and like how women are supposed to sort of cultivate the brow in fashion, and the fact that hers rebel against the dominant fashion at the time, I thought was like such a really interesting moment, especially because she is also being represented as being like more uncannily alluring for that sort of casting off. So I did find sort of the discrepancies in her magical transformation very interesting.
Definitely. Yeah, no, it's, and then, you know, I think there's also something there in terms of like, what does she choose to do with like all this power? She chooses to take vengeance for this man who is too depressed to do it himself.
She does love him. Does he deserve her? I don't know. Yes, no, fine. Like, I had a lot of feelings about it, but I'm glad that it made her happy, I guess, was sort of where I came to turn. It's like she had a lot of choices in that moment, and I think her choices throughout sort of the Margarita sections are very interesting. And so while I definitely had questions for her, I feel like if I had been her friend, I might have asked her a few things about some of her decisions, but at the same time, like, those aren't the only choices she makes, but they seem to make her happy. So like, all right, is the place I came to it with her. And it was just like, yeah, like, I love that this is what you want to do with your time. Like, go be in a lake, go hang out, go fuck up this critic, like everything about it. Like, yeah, like what she wants to do with her time once she's freed from all of her constraints. I found to be very, very interesting. And Natasha too, because Natasha is like, did not get enough time. She probably got exactly the correct amount of time for the idea of a novel, but like always leave them wanting more. And I definitely was like, I would love to read more about this person. I thought she was great too.
Well, because she becomes like a full-time witch, but like Margarita kind of
whatever that means, she does it. And I'm like, all right.
Yeah, Ben, I don't know if you thought about this, but I found myself thinking back to a book we read earlier this season, Love Town, which is a book about gay men in 60s Soviet Poland. And I found myself thinking about the ways in which a big part of like what this kind of witch section seems to be dealing with is the ways in which like these repressed feelings like have to resurface in some way. There's always going to be a return of the repressed, and it's kind of a matter of the state, the kind of rationalistic mode of human life like cannot like order all our feelings. Molly, I like the way you put it, where it was like, if you were Margarita's friend, you'd be like, is the master really worth all this? But it makes her happy. It's this thing of like, sometimes you can't reason someone through their emotions that way. You can't talk someone out of being in love if they're in love, even if maybe it's not for the best. I think there's something powerful there. And again, I think also, probably depends on your feelings about that Pontius Pilate novel. Is that truly a great work of art? Does it justify
I had a lot of
things
thoughts
the
about
master
that
has
too.
put himself and this poor woman through?
Yeah, I do wonder if like the sort of like melancholy, depressed nature of the master is like played up as like a commentary on like artistic temperament, where he's like I'm writing, I'm in my writer's nook, I'm the best, and then anytime there's any like trouble or pushback or like he has no ideas, he's just like crestfallen. And like I wondered if that was like played up a certain way, because he's like, I hate this novel, I never want to look at it, even though like according to Margarita it's like the best thing ever and like worth saving his ass for. So yeah, I don't know, it's interesting.
They're living in a time where definitely like critics could absolutely ruin your career, but critics could also lead you to the gulag, and critics could also lead you to death. And so this had actually absolutely happened to Bulgakov and his friends. Bulgakov himself was never arrested, but several of his friends had been arrested, and especially a few of his contemporaries, Isaac Babel, who wrote The Red Cavalry, who was arrested, and then I don't think we even found out until the 90s or later, but like was the day that he was arrested, taken out back and shot, like executed. But not only that, but he had several friends commit suicide, one of which was Vladimir Mayakovsky, who was a poet and sort of like another absurdist writer. And Mayakovsky was very much in with the Soviet Union in the 20s, but then as the crackdown happened and socialist realism, which we can talk about if you desire, socialist realism kind of becomes in vogue and like the only standard genre of everything. Mayakovsky felt really creatively stifled, and Mayakovsky committed suicide, as did another woman named Marina Tsvetaeva. And so like a lot of people that he knew in his literary circles were being arrested and shot and killed or committing suicide. And so these critics, like it is a life and death situation for Bulgakov. And so like having these critics come and say that what you're writing is inappropriate could absolutely be a death sentence.
I don't want to have anyone executed. I don't want to send anyone to a gulag, but I do think we should make it, literary critics should have significantly more social power again.
Interesting. Don't think? I don't know. We're not to take everything back to Goodreads, but I mean, given a lot of the major literary scandals, at least in sort of fantasy and then YA over the past few years, like, I mean, I was thinking about that too, given like how sort of Buzz and Goodreads and these and TikTok and all of these things can like literally like break a writer's career. I mean, like we saw someone like lose their agent. We've seen all of these different, I mean, you know what? I mean, suicide is worse. Like, absolutely. I'm not like, not to compare, like it is not Soviet times right now, but like, that power of the critic, like maybe not in terms of the way we're seeing it manifested there, but I mean, there was just a scandal just this past week about like a TikTok sensation author who then like has experienced like enormous blowback because the novel failed to live up to the expectations of all these people who had not read it, but had read its list of tropes or something. And I was like, having read I don't want to get into whether or not who's right here. Having read a sample, I will be very quiet about that part. But like at the same time, like, is this the right way? Like, is it the right way that even before a novel comes out, like in Master and Margarita, that it, like someone's life can be destroyed, and then there's weird similarities to what we're seeing in terms of sort of online criticism and social media that I think resonated, if not mirrored, sort of what I felt like was happening a little bit in terms of that section. And
definitely.
The power of the critic is an interesting one. I love it. I mean, like I too wish that we were living in an age where like art critics had that level of power over social, like the society's mind about things. But like that is a very, speaking of Faustian bargains, like I'm not sure, right?
Yeah.
Like that's also is that the world I want to live in? I don't know. Like
I was joking.
Curled inward, right? Like,
just being like, citizen, you have not used the acceptable tropes for this novel. Like,
you know.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you there, Molly. I definitely think there's something there. Again, kind of in this strange way where we do still like have a lot of censorship around art. It's just done informally now. It's done via kind of information deluge by drowning things out with so many, like, you know, I'm thinking of like review bombing, you know, things that are really just designed to kick the legs out of a piece of work before it even has a chance to find an audience, to say nothing of, again, just like the struggle to get published and to find a market for things that, you know, don't fit particular models. You know, if you don't have those nice clean comps, or you don't have you know, if you're not doing the trendy trope right now, it's like, or if you just don't want to talk about your book in terms of tropes, you know, it becomes significantly harder to get published at all. And, you know, even if you get published with like a small press, it's like, then you have to worry about even finding an audience. And that means you have to be on social media. You know, it's, again, not as bad as getting arrested based on
certainly not. Like, certainly
bad
not.
Goodreads
Like,
review.
The perspective is real, but also like, I think it is like how hard it is for artists out there is like one of the themes that I find most interesting throughout in art, that like artists tend to put that into their work because it is like, it has always been part of the struggle, is like, how do I get people to read this thing that I think is important enough that I have spent how many years of my life like creating and working on, and how much of myself have I poured into it. And so I don't know, like, I guess like we'll have to be careful about what we want for the critics, who are wonderful and valuable, and and they should all read everything that everybody writes and give their opinions on it, especially if they're good and they're mean. Anyway.
Well, I did want to bring up, you mentioned like the struggles of making it, and it's like Bulgakov did have to like burn portions of these manuscripts, and like we see it in this book too. Like burning it, like hiding it, losing the manuscript, like that. And then I think that's when, I don't remember who says manuscripts don't burn. I think Woland. Yeah. And so like the idea that like, even if censorship happens, you lose your manuscript, even if critics review poorly, like creativity, the work will still survive in some way. I found to be pretty encouraging, almost like Bulgakov was addressing himself, but also like the way the plot happens, where Woland returns the manuscript to him as part of the Faustian bargain that Margarita does. Like, I don't know, there's something there too, in terms of like how difficult it is to create, and like, and yeah, the way it still matters and will continue to persist despite it.
I was kind of thinking about this. So like earlier this week, I went down to Denver and I went to the Clifford Still Museum, and Clifford Still was an abstract expressionist. He was a contemporary of Pollock, but never really achieved the same level of fame as some of the other people that we would like immediately recognize. And but he seemed like this irascible, like fuck them if they can't take a joke kind of guy. And I was thinking about him as I was sort of finishing up this novel, because like, and I took a picture of it on the wall. One of the vinyl writings was that I guess like in the New York Times in 1971, somebody wrote like this like article about Clifford Still called "Fate Comes Late for Clifford Still." And I guess Mr. Still responded to it with this, which is, Herein I am deeply outraged that my entire life is being interpreted as a long struggle to be recognized by some damn fool art critics or to be sold successfully in the galleries or even to find their way into art museums because I consider these institutions to be corrupt in the purpose and their meaning and their effect on the artist and society.
Wow.
And I was just like, what a banger of a quote to read alongside Master and Margarita, because I just felt like this is definitely like, okay, now this man has goals for me. Like I would love to have this sort of attitude about it. But it was interesting because he also, is this even true? Like he definitely went to Yaddo. He was definitely a professor. He definitely had all these gallery exhibitions and he had like a weird wife who was out there like being a total bulldog for him. So, with a grain of salt, but at least the attitude of just sort of like drag them about one's critics, I think is such a great spirit to bring to art, even if criticism does have a valid place in sort of the art world. So,
yeah. Well, I think that there's something here about like the fact that art is this strange thing because it's both deeply, deeply personal. It's something that exists, wells up from inside of you, but it's also something that you are driven to share with the world. And, that dialectic like is what makes it art to a certain degree. I don't have like a super well thought out framework for this, but that's what I'm going to say right now.
I like it.
Yeah, so I think that there's something here in terms of like manuscripts don't burn. Obviously manuscripts, paper can burn, but the idea like is still yours. It's still in you. You can still like, and he presumably like he rewrote this thing, probably a dozen times, and each one of those was a little different, but I'm sure the core idea was there the whole time. I don't know what that initially was, if it was an image, if it was a sentence, but there was some kernel here that he carried through all that time and produced this particular thing. And then it did make its way into the world and it did meet with success, but even under like these conditions, it's like if you have the idea inside of you and you have the will to put it into the world, like that's where like the real value in being an artist is to some degree. Obviously you should get paid, you should be able to make a living doing these things.
Well, that reminds me of the other big quote from this, which is cowardice is one of the worst vices. And so I might have missed this in the read through, but is the master punished for cowardness? Like, is he punished because he like didn't want to finish it or couldn't finish it? And like you were just talking about kind of having the will to express it, to like manifest the artwork. And it's like, it feels like he doesn't, but then he's given the chance to write the final line. And like, there's a scene where it felt very like metafictionally, where like Pontius Pilate is like frozen in this like unfinished book. And then like the master is able to free him with the last line. I don't know, like, am I misinterpreting that? Did any other people notice that, like, the cowardness sort of applying to the master in some way? I feel like I might have missed something, though, because, like, there was a lot going on in the end, so I might have, but...
I think you're absolutely right, and it's a hotly debated topic, because you're talking about the line that he doesn't deserve light, he deserves peace, right? And they're talking about the master. And so... cowardice is the greatest sin. You can read this as Bulgakov definitely talking about himself. He wrote, as you've said, like, and rewrote the Master Margarita many times, and he burned it. But more so than that, during the last few years of his life, he wrote a play about young Stalin's childhood called Batum. And it was all set, like dress rehearsals, everything. The night before it's supposed to premiere, Stalin puts the nix on it and it's never shown.
Wow.
And Bulgakov, this was not unusual, that things that depicted Stalin would be like put into process and then quickly canceled because of the whims of Stalin. But Bulgakov himself always felt like that was his moment of cowardice, that he had finally given in to writing something that went against his ideals, that went against his creativity, just to sort of play nice with Soviet critics in the hopes that he could at least get something produced, even if it was something that went against his own morals. Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of read that as Bulgakov, as like the master being feeling as though like the master's always afraid. He's
Yeah.
afraid when he gets arrested. He's afraid in the insane asylum. He's afraid when he first meets Roland. And that cowardice sort of, once you're able to overcome that, like Margarita is very much, she's a little afraid when she first meets Azazello and Roland, but she quickly gets over her fear once she realizes what's going to happen. Whereas the master might not ever get over it, but he needs some sort of like outside help. So I would agree and say that, yes, like cowardice, the master was absolutely, he was punished in a certain extent for his cowardice, but he was able to, because he did continue to write and to create, he is given peace, not light. And you can kind of juxtapose that with Bezdeny, who stops writing. You can see him as a failed disciple of the master at the end of the novel in the epilogue. And so like he's stuck in sort of that same weird place that Pontius Pilate was, because he's no longer creating. He's allowed cowardice to finally get the better of him.
And he's a philosophy professor. He's insisting on trying to make sense of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about the parallel there, but I totally see that, him sort of like, retreating from poetry at the end. So
I was so sad about that. I really like that that really got me. And this was when he sort of was like, oh, no. Because we're set up with the whole, before the last sort of, before the epilogue, we get the poet insisting that he's done with poetry, that he will not return to this. And I was like, I really hope there's like a reversal of this. But the fact that he didn't is both like perfect and very sad. And I think, it's one of the reasons that while I was like, wow, this is such an interesting place to end the novel, at the same time, it made a lot of sense to me. But I was very disappointed, even if I could kind of understand it. And I did wonder what this person's in, like, not his fate in terms of what will happen to him, but his sort of how he looks at himself forevermore, and like knowing this about himself just seems like such profound torture. But I was like very sad that he chose this other life. Although, arguably a lot of us, I mean, I started out as thinking I wanted to be an academic, and then became a fiction writer. And I don't think that was like cowardice, because I just didn't want to deal with academia. Like arguably, like science fiction and fantasy publishing is no less of a backbiting, weird environment. Everyone's wonderful. I just mean that, like, people change what they want to do, but it didn't seem like that change was organic to him, but rather like it had been imposed on him and he allowed it to happen to him. And that kind of got me a little bit. I was sad for him. I did not want that to be his fate after experiencing all the events of this novel, but it makes sense that it would be.
Well, he's also described as like going crazy every full moon, or every, which, like, I don't know, like, obviously that sounds like it sucks, but I wondered if that's like some sort of like divine creative madness or something. I don't know. It's interesting that he's still marked by that. Like, it's almost like a PTSD thing or something. I don't know, but
well, again, not to put on my Freudian hat as usual, but he has like this repetition compulsion to go every year back to Patriarch's Pond to like go to the site where he had this numinous experience, and theoretically that could have been the impetus for his artistic career, and it seems like maybe it is at first when he goes mad. But then he backs off and he represses that experience, and he has these, like you said, Ben, monthly night terrors, and he, say what you will about philosophy professors, not like the most swinging cats in the world. So he's almost kind of in the same way as Margarita, kind of when we first meet her, she's taken one route of two. He has kind of done the same thing, and he's taken the safe road, whereas Margarita gets the chance to take the safe road and then change her mind. And maybe he does eventually too, and we just don't see it. Like you said, these night terrors do seem to point to some lingering like spiritual presence or creative capacity in him, but he's not at the moment when we see him.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, I mean, there's a lot of people out there who do give up their art, and like sometimes it does make them stop reading, or make, it like causes them to have or react to the success of others, or to react to seeing certain themes that they would have maybe wanted to incorporate in their whatever art form it is, like show up in someone else's. And that's when we were talking about when Bulgakov was talking about the full moon and sort of this mania that comes upon him, I was definitely like, write your poetry, man. Like I bet I don't have any evidence or a paper I can point to or anything but my heart guiding me. But it was like, I wonder if that would be happening to him if he just went back to his poetry. Like, would that be the cure for this? Is this the lingering punishment for having like surrendered that part of himself? I don't know, but that's at least what I took from it. And it was like, oh, like, never give it up. Like, it's like, like you can't, like, if you have this compulsion, like you can never really truly give it up. Like, it'll always be there, a part of you. And maybe you express it in different ways, or you find a different outlet because of the person you become. But if you do repress it entirely, like it will come out in weird ways.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I don't have any evidence for this, but it felt like a lesson to me, where if I'm struggling with what I'm doing, or I'm like, is this important? Then it's like, well, like, yes, I feel like it was a good cautionary tale. At least my interpretation of it was. So
yeah. Like, don't repress it. Yeah.
So I know we just talked about the ending, but I do want to like shift gears back just a smidge in the narrative, because I feel like
I feel like that was, you're saying we'll pull one piece of this book and then we end up somewhere else. So I think that makes total sense.
Hold on one sec. I did want to hear, like, Melissa knows about this book, so like,
I
just wanted to hear like your thought, because like you're smart about this.
It's funny that you thought that him writing poetry would help him when Bulgakov would say no, because the poetry that he was writing was that socialist realism.
Oh yeah.
So like when he's writing that poem at the beginning about Jesus being like a terrible human being, that is absolutely like in the vein of the socialist realism, which is like it had to put the Communist Party first. It had to espouse Bolshevik ideas, Marxian ideas. It had to be very, it had to basically be a moment of learning and teaching to the masses, instead of being like a pure conduit of art.
Yeah, that reminds me, Adorno has a quick one-liner about that kind of stuff, where he says it's all just boy meets tractor stories.
Absolutely. There's like a piece of socialist realist called Cement by a guy named Glakov. And there's a moment in this book where there's a man and a woman, and she's like, I love you. And he's like, yeah. And she's like, but there's one thing I love more than you. And he's like, oh. And she's like, the Bolsheviks. Like, that's just like the Communist Party. Like, this is a legit line. Yeah. That's what socialist realism is about. But so I don't think like him writing poetry would help him, because he would have to write like the master would write, and he would have to write something that truly fulfilled him. But at the same time, that would be very dangerous to Biezdomny at this moment in time. So that's like, it's interesting that you said that he becomes a philosophy professor, because that goes all the way back to that first chapter of Never Talk to Strangers, when Wolin talks about having breakfast with Kant, and Ivan the poet has no idea who Kant is, right? And he's like, sounds like that guy deserves like 3 months at Solovki, which Solovki was like basically the gulag, like it was the prisoners. And so like the fact that he then, what that raises, like the whole idea of Kant is like, if you're talking about the categorical imperative, Kant was a big no when it comes to lying, which is again one of the major themes of the novel. And so if you were to ask Kant in Soviet Russia a question, he would not lie to you. So if the secret police came knocking and said, do you know where so-and-so is? He would be like, yes. And then they would ask him, well, where is this person? He'd be like, I'm not able to tell you. And absolutely, he would go to Solovki. Absolutely, he'd be arrested and thrown in jail. Yeah. So what Bulgakov is really asking there is, can you be a good person in Soviet society? And so later on at the end, in the epilogue, when Ivan is now a philosophy professor, he is now, teaching Kant, hopefully. He has that struggle, like, can I be a good person? Can I be a good author in Soviet society? And Ivan absolutely thinks, no, I can't. Whereas the master is like, yes, I can, but then it leads to, his suffering in the insane asylum, and it leads to him being in this terrible place. So it's really hard. Like, I don't know that writing would actually help Ivan, because can you be a good writer in Soviet Russia?
Well, I think that's why I keep coming back to this thing where he keeps coming back to where he met the devil, because I definitely read like the diabolical elements here is kind of like, again, this romantic artistic force. And he was doing all that before. Then he meets the devil. He has this religious experience with this, profound, phantasmagorical, ethereal power that upends like the way he understands. Like, he can't write socialist realist poetry anymore.
No.
So I don't think he would be trying to return to like writing that kind of stuff. But like you said, he can't necessarily write what he would really want to write after meeting the devil either. And so that's kind of where he's in this double bind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that to me casts the Night Terrors as like, like you were saying, like kind of crisis of conscience, or like, what am I doing? Like, can I do these things I'm trying to do as well? So, yeah.
Yeah. And the moon is always going to be like, you can't stop the moon, right? Like, it's going to always be there in this like weird reminder. So like the social pressures, like, I don't know. Like, I thought that the moon image was really interesting, like throughout, because like this sort of the relationship to reality, there can be so much that we do, but like you can't stop the moon from going through its phases. And so like he can't, I don't know. I guess I thought about it as sort of this like persistent reminder of sort of like, there is the society and like where he is and like what he's doing, but then there is also this sort of objective reality out there that like it is inescapable, because it is like definitely like triggering him to like remembering these experiences no matter like what they were. And I don't know, but I'm also like one of those like look at the moon girls, so like I'm always like happy to see the moon like in a book or anything.
Pro moon.
I am pro moon.
Well, again, in the story, like the moon reveals, it's not it's not a force of illusion, it's a force of truth. And so the full moon, it's unveiling something in him that he is hiding.
Yeah.
Which is nice, because the moon isn't often like the truth symbol, right? Like, but I did like that it sort of was sort of present in this as at least something that like can strip away as well as occlude. And so like, I don't know, I was there for it. But then again, it was just sort of like that last scene where they're like in the moonlight, like, and like you see the sad armor and like all, and I was just like having like a moment with all of that I don't know.
Definitely.
I think Molly, when you were talking about like the moon is this sort of like immovable force, I think we haven't yet talked about power and who has it in this book. Because I would say that for Bulgakov at least, and especially for Yeshua in the pilot chapters, there's another immovable force other than the sun and the moon, and that is the Emperor Tiberius, which is really just a stand-in for Stalin. Like, you'll notice that Stalin is never even really obliquely referenced. There's one very minor reference to Stalin in this book, and that is in Satan's Grand Ball, when the last two people who come to the ball after like all the sinners in hell, the last two sinners in hell, that great Margarita, are a former head of the secret police and then his secretary, and they had been tried and executed for attempting to poison the newer head of the KGB's walls with poison, and to like poison him through this weird paint that they were going to put on the walls. And so like that is the only reference at all to Stalin, is like the head of this KGB guy. But really all of that Stalin once again is kind of displaced into the pilot chapters. And so the Emperor Tiberius, like, he has the power, but does he really? Because like Woland has a lot of power. And also like Margarita has her own power, because she forgives Frida at Satan's ball. And that Woland says, like, that's not a power I have, forgiveness. It is something that you can do. So I always thought that was really fascinating. Who has power? Who holds it? How do they wield it?
Yeah. Isn't Tiberius the pretext for killing Yeshua
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think it's the fact that Yeshua said something against Tiberius. I think he didn't affirm his like one all powerfulness. I think, and so then Pilate's like, I kind of have to kill you now.
He was to overlook his first crime, which was like agitation or causing a rebellion, but he was unable to look over Yeshua's second crime, which was basically talking shit about the emperor. Which again goes to like Kant's categorical imperative, like, can you be a good man in Soviet society? Because when Pilate asks Yeshua, are you sure that's what you said about the emperor? And he's giving Yeshua here a moment to lie and save himself. Yeshua doesn't do it because that's not what a good man would do. And so like that's absolutely the pretext for condemning Yeshua. And that would be the pretext for having somebody be shot in Soviet Russia. Would be speaking out against Stalin like Bulgakov did all the time.
Yeah. The Pilate chapters are something I feel like we've talked around a little bit, and I did want to address them a little more directly because I think they're really fascinating. The ways in which he is really playing with the biblical narrative. And then when we find out that, this is the Master's novel, it raises, it's already doing this thing of defamiliarizing. I think it's really striking the way that he really does not adhere to the biblical narrative at all. Again, no one's by their right name except for Pontius Pilate. None of the events happen the way that they are, quote unquote, supposed to. We don't have Jesus clearing the moneylenders out of the temple. We don't really even get the impression that he's necessarily saying any of the words he says in the Bible. There's a reference to the fact that he only has one disciple who he does not actually seem to want to be his disciple, who is Matthew Levi.
Yeah, Matthew Levi, the tax collector.
He refers to as like this imp of a man who follows me around, like scrawling everything I write down. But it's like he says like he's read his writings and they're not the things he says. So
he says to burn the parchment, which goes back to manuscripts don't burn.
Yeah, so it's this thing of Matthew Levi is the implication is fabricating the biblical narrative, and even like when we get to the crucifixion, none of that happens the way that it does. If you've read the Synoptic Gospels, like he's like, are they even like crucified in the way that we would think of it? They're like hung on poles, but not necessarily like nailed on the cross the way we would think.
And the crucifixion scene, the crucifixion scene is only told to us through the lens of Afranius, who is the head of the secret police in Jerusalem. So you don't even know if what Afranius is telling Pontius Pilate is what actually happened or not. And so I think that's always a really interesting details, because the only words that we hear the audience, Yeshua, say is like hegemon, right? He says hegemon. But Afranius says that like his last words were something very different. And so like, can we trust Afranius when he says this, or did Yeshua actually say that? And I don't remember what he says, but I can look it up.
Oh, well, what I was going to say, what I think is so interesting here. So again, we have at the very beginning, we have the devil kind of lead us into this narrative saying, I was there. I heard Pontius Pilate go through all this.
Where is he? Because he's not there. It's
portrayed originally as the real story. This is what actually happened versus the biblical narrative. Then we find out, this is a novel that was written by a guy who's alive right now. This narrative is actually, we'll just say like a handful of years old. And then we find out, because the real, quote unquote, like real biblical Matthew, the saint, shows up to talk to Voland at one point at the end. And so we find out, wait, the devil's been here the whole time. What are we talking about? this like humanist version of the story is also probably not real, or is only real up to a certain point, because the devil is real, and so God is presumably also real. He sent this guy here to intercede with the devil.
Yeah, see, that's what I was bringing up earlier, where it's like, it's only in that moment it's like, God and Jesus like confirmed is real, or like there's like a good to match the evil. It's like when Matthew Levi shows up as the saint.
They don't do anything. They like basically pronounce judgment on Margarita and the Master. That's where they're like, they get to be together in hell. A nice part of hell.
I wouldn't say hell. I don't think
it's limbo, more or less.
Yeah, purgatory.
Well, yeah, so is purgatory just they hang out at that house and their friends show up every night and they get to hang out with their friends and that's it? I think, like, yeah, it's like, it's not a bad limbo, but I guess it's not heaven. So, yeah.
Well, there's also kind of an element here where, like, I don't know, how bad is hell in this in this world? Like,
yeah,
you know, we see the one woman, Frida, who does seem to be having a truly horrible time with like a full-on, ironic punishment. But a lot of people, like, they're going to a ball, like there's a monkey jazz band. I don't know. Yeah. The devil seems like a pretty like stand-up guy overall. Like, as long as you are willing to play along with his pranks, like he does not actually seem particularly evil. And even when he does do something evil, usually there's just a little sleight of hand to kind of or like, again, they put the guy's head back on, you know.
It's funny because, like, in Russian culture, the devil would never ever have as much power as God. Like, here in the West, especially like in America with our Puritan background, we have this idea that the devil is kind of very powerful and he's out to get you and out to get your soul. Whereas Woland is more of from like kind of Russian folktale. I don't know how much you know about like Baba Yaga and like the Domovoy, but any sort of Russian spirit from medievally times, whatever you give to them, they give you back. And so if you are bad to them, they will be bad to you. But if you were good to them and you listen to them and you follow their instructions and you are good at heart, then they will reward you. And so that's kind of how Woland is that he's this very folklore character where if he's always giving gifts, like if you ever noticed, anytime he meets somebody, he'd always give you a gift of like food or a gift of clothes or what have you. And if you just take these things without giving anything in return, you are punished. But Margarita, she gives and gives and gives. Like, she is hostess for his ball and she suffers immensely. She has like every sinner in hell come to her and kiss her knee. She has this burden of this necklace. I mean, it's really the Stations of the Cross, right? Like, we're talking about the terror being displaced into the Jerusalem chapters. The mystical and like the biblical stuff, like Yvonne is baptized in the river, but Margarita goes through like the Stations of the Cross. And so she has her own crucifixion at Satan's like grand ball. And so and even then, when it's her chance to have her wish, she doesn't immediately think of the master. She thinks of Frida. And the reason why that she forgives Frida and has the power to forgive Frida is because she made a promise, which is like the highest standard that you can uphold in a Russian folktale, is that you live by your word. And so she has the power to free Frida because mercy, as Woland says, like, is not my department, which I always read as like, that's God's department. Like, don't get me started with this. But then, like, even then, when he's like, is there anything else I can do for you? She's like, no, only if you require more of me. And so she's selfless and she's sacrificing. And only in that moment does he offer. And he says, Woland offers her the power to get the master out. So it's again, going back to power, who has it? How do they wield it?
No, it's definitely interesting because the devil does seem constrained in these various ways. But, you know, he does seem to have this place in the universe. I don't know. I almost, by the end of it, it almost was this thing of like, I kept coming back to like the line from Hamlet, you know, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. You know, there's almost this element where by the end, yes, we have the biblical characters here. There's the devil, there's God, there's Saint Matthew, but like all the stuff that we human beings maybe think about the way the world works, despite being the world we theoretically know, we don't actually understand.
Yeah.
The devil might not be, in fact, ultimate evil. The world is more complicated than that. The world like overflows our attempts to like put boundaries on it. The devil can be a nice guy. God can be kind of a do nothing. You know, these narratives we have, these clean stories we tell to order society, like, are always going to be like buckling under the weight of reality. And that's what I kept coming back to. Like the story we're being told here like is not as simple as maybe you would originally think.
Yeah, and I feel like the emphasis that you were describing, Melissa, on her sticking to her word goes back to the truth telling and the kind of like, things might be super crazy. You might have no idea what's going on, but like sticking to your principles, being true to your word, upholding your end of the bargain, that comes through at the end there.
That's why all of the sinners in hell, that's why they get that party, is because they're true to themselves. They're terrible human beings, but they were true to themselves. They never put on masks as to who they were. They never said that they were anything else. And that's why they're rewarded with one night of frivolity, is because of this truth.
I love how many like poisoners are there.
Yeah,
there's just like a page of poisoners. It's just like, which I just thought was really funny. It's like all the poisoners are here. Like,
great little bit of body horror too, where they're describing like how swollen and like fucked up her knee is from everyone being kissed like billions of times.
Well, it's also like when you go to a party and you just meet too many people. Yeah, it's just like no one is like I'm not registering any of this anymore. Like,
the first time you go to like a party with like a new group of friends and it's just like you're totally overwhelmed and you don't even really know the people you're there with.
They're poisoners. Yeah. Molly, you did bring up whose story this is at the end. We could come back to that.
That's 101 stuff. I don't know. I just thought it was like interesting. I guess I was thinking about like what, like a weird pull, but like the good place, right? Like, like where the good place ends and like who it, and the note that it ends on always was one of the things that really irritated me about that. Like, I love that show. I it is good, but I actually prefer it without that last episode, because where it ends, I was sort of like, is this whose story it is? Is this about this demon, or is this about the like? So I was having similar thoughts to like, does this frame make this book about this character or not? But I don't know, because I'm suspicious of that reading of novels and structures as well. But I don't know. It was a weird place to end a weird book, and I was there for it. But it made me think back to sort of where I began it a year ago, basically. Maybe even, I guess about exactly a year ago. And it was like, if I had read it all at once, would that have landed more for me? I don't know, but I thought it was an intriguing choice, but it ultimately worked. And again, like, rules are stupid. So
yeah, because like I had always heard like a similar version of that, where like the ending is what the story is like really about, like in quotes, like, and like the idea that it like makes a gesture towards what it's really about, like the ending of Sopranos, which I'm not going to spoil, or something like that. But I think like the end of the book, like having it end with homeless, makes it seem like he's like we were saying earlier, like the struggle to be a good man, to be a truth teller in this society. That's super important. Although the whole thing with the cats made me feel like the "Where Are They Now" section, or it's like, and a lot of black cats were unfortunately killed that year because of behemoths.
I feel bad for those cats. I was sad. I was sad about that. They didn't do anything wrong. No cat has ever done anything wrong, but those cats especially were very innocent. So
yeah.
I do like how at the end they're like, after they leave, like all these inspectors like pour into town and they're like, what happened? And the best thing they can come up with is like mass hypnosis and ventriloquism, which is frankly, in my opinion, like a more spurious explanation than the literal devil showing up and doing all this stuff.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh yeah, sure, of course. Yeah.
And I did love too in that section, like that, and again, like, I don't know, again, like this is me sort of reading it, having an intuition, but like when the woman has to stand up for her cat and be like, no, he never did anything wrong, and like has to talk to the police about it. I was like, I feel like we're getting back to that place of like Soviet critique, right? Because like it just like I wonder if like people were called into account for, I mean, probably people were called into account for other people, but here she's having to do it for like this cat. I've known him since he was a kitten. He's only 5. He's never committed a crime. And I was like, this feels pointed. I don't know, but I'm glad that she did indeed save that one of the cats.
it made me almost think of like the Satanic Panic. It's like, oh, this is like a moral like paranoia. That's not the right term for that.
Well, there's also like a worry of contagion, right?
Panic too. Moral panic. Yeah.
Moral panic. That's what Yeah, like everyone's just deluding themselves into thinking they have this figured out. And it's like, oh, if we just find the right black cat.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, there was a lot of like informing on people. I forget the name, but there was a young child who informed on his parents, and his parents were arrested, and I'm pretty sure that they were executed. And he became like a symbol of righteousness. Like he was like a young communist Boy Scout, and they were called pioneers. It was really truly like communist Boy Scouts, and the government kind of touted him as this bastion of truth, that like, look at this pure Soviet citizen. He even informed on his own parents. I think he informed on them being kulaks, which was like a rich peasant back in the 20s and 30s. And so like that idea, going back to like, I vouch for this cat, you would have to vouch for the people that you know, because if the idea that like your husband has suddenly been arrested and he's in jail for this terrible crime, do you believe the state that says, well, your husband did this counter-revolutionary thing and your husband's a criminal? Or do you believe your husband that you know is a good human being? And if you then start thinking about, well, if my husband isn't a criminal, then that means my government is lying to me. And then that causes all sorts of terrible problems for you and for everyone else.
Yeah, it's like the order of meaning. Yeah. So, yeah.
And that's why everybody was so obsessed with being secretive and with exposing others and having these masks that they wore in and outside of Soviet society.
Okay, I have a question to pose. That might be a little pat, but so I'm wondering, you know, we asked earlier, like, was the master punished for his cowardice? And I'm curious, kind of now that we're here at the end, do they actually get a happy ending?
Right, because
debated topic.
Yeah, because it's like this. I was talking about the limbo. It's like a small house, and they get to stay with each other, sort of like their idyllic beginning of their relationship. And then their friends visit every night, which also doesn't sound that bad. But it's not in heaven. It's in limbo, and they're not.
Well, they have to kill themselves first.
Yeah, they have to
poison.
Yeah, the poisoner theme returns. So I don't know. I feel like being glib about it. It doesn't seem that bad, but it's also sort of like the Faustian bargain paying out or something, like the end result being like what you deserve. It seems related to that.
I mean, they are dealing with the devil.
Right.
And, you know, I keep coming back to what Molly said, because it did not occur to me when I was first reading the book of, again, like, are these people actually a good match for each other?
Well, yeah, because he's the
master. Have like a really intense fling in their 20s, and Margarita convinced herself this guy was a genius, and you know he got really depressed, and they broke up.
It does sound like they had a super intense fling, because it's like they like fell into love like immediately or something. Like they're described as falling into love without even trying. So yeah.
Specifically, this is a very Bulgakov thing. Is they fell in love as if they had been stabbed by a Finnish knife. And like Bulgakov was Bulgakov was all about knives, but I think this kind of goes back to like power as violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so like them falling in love is this very violent thing. But yeah, it's very passionate, very flingy. They fall in love in spring. Springtime is very important in this novel. They fall in love in spring. Over the summer, they try to get the novel published. He has a bad time in the fall, and then he checks himself into the insane asylum. So they haven't even known each other for a year.
Yeah. And she spends 10 years carrying a torch for him.
I think it's only like 3.
I assumed it was longer just because she's 30 at the beginning. So I got the impression that she'd been like married to her husband for
I'm sure she's been married to her husband for a while, but I think she's only known the master for about a year.
Yeah, she was already married when she met him.
Oh, Oh, I didn't. Okay, I misread.
No, yeah, they're both married.
They're
to other
both
people.
having an affair.
Yeah.
Okay, that adds a whole other.
Well, yeah. Also, love leapt out in front of us like a murderer in an alley, leaping out of nowhere, and struck us both at once. As lightning strikes, as a Finnish knife strikes. Yeah, so that sounds very, very, suddenly passionate and taking by surprise. So
yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, don't get me wrong. I want to believe in love. I want to believe in true love. But if you told me that, like, if I've been like dating someone like secretly for like 6 months, and you're like, you're going to spend the rest of eternity with this person in a tiny cabin.
But John, what if they wrote the best novel you've ever read?
Well, the thing about that is that the best novel I've ever read changes like every 6 months.
That's a fair point. Yeah. You'd be like, actually, I don't like this anymore.
I'm on to a new thing.
Yeah.
It kind of actually, like, I mean, it is limbo. It's not, I mean, that's at least how I interpreted it. But the thing that it reminded me the most of is the Talking Heads song Heaven, where it's like, it's this place where nothing ever happens. And I guess that was the other part I was thinking about with The Good Place with this, is that sort of like the problem of heaven. You cannot grow and change. Is it truly heaven? Like, that question is a really interesting one. And it sort of made me think about like, well, like, do the Master and Margarita, like, what did they think that they have? Did they think of this as limbo? Did they think of this as heaven? Did they think of this as hell? Like, we can debate what we think about these two people and how, I mean, I have questions for their long-term sustainability as a relationship, but like, maybe it'll be perfect, maybe not. But like, they are both like given and condemned to this fate where like the same thing happens over and over and over again. So now they are frozen in the way that like Pontius Pilate is frozen. Yep. Right. Like, because if it's limbo and it's eternal, then like it is this sort of, it's the same thing happening over and over and over again. And like, is the person that you fall in love with in your 20s the person that you, maybe it happens, right? But like, I don't know. I thought it was very interesting that he trades. It's almost like the Master is like not the most active character in this book. He is sort of, things happen to him, but he does release Pilate. But then like what then he experiences is very similar to what it's like, almost like he replaced him in this cosmic. Yeah. At least that was like how I was feeling about it. And I was just like, well, I don't know. Like, I hope that works out for you. But I was both skeptical and wanted it to be real. But, maybe if they want it to be real enough, then like that also will help them in this, or maybe they will end up wanting to kill each other, but they can't because they're already dead.
But all their friends show up every night. I'm like,
every night. Do you want to see your friends every night? Like, I love my friends, and I also like love being alone in my house. So like when it's like every night they're coming over, and it's like
to their small house,
to their small house, right? And it's just like. Maybe, I mean, on some level, sure. Like they're playing my favorite song. They're playing it one more time, playing it all night long. Like, right. But at the same time, like, is that what is that dream? What of that comfort? Will that actually be the thing that fulfills them? I don't know.
Isn't also in heaven? Don't they like everyone goes home at the same time? I think, right? Yeah. And because there's another great detail in that song. It's like everyone plays their favorite song. They're like, great, and then they just go home. They're like, they're like, I'm in heaven.
It's over. It will start again, right? Yeah. Like I don't know. Like it was just like on my mind a lot. But I don't know because I hope, and it is forever. So we shall see.
There is something that they get in purgatory that they don't have right now, which is freedom. Like the freedom for the Master to write. Margarita, is she free? That is a question, but there's no Stalin, there's no critics, there's no looming specter of death for them because of the thoughts that they have. So I don't think it's a punishment. I think it's the best that they can get because Woland is a symbol of freedom. The devil is a symbol of freedom that he is unchaining these people. But
I don't know. It's interesting because like the Master doesn't even seem to want the freedom to write. He seems very opposed to this notion that he should. So I guess, like, yes, he does have this freedom from the critics and like freedom from Soviet society, but he doesn't. He says he doesn't want to write anymore.
Yeah.
And he says he would like Margarita to leave him alone. And so, like, are these statements both lies? Are these statements both true? And like, I don't know. It's like the ending of Sense and Sensibility. Like, I would like to believe that this is a love story and this is a happy ending, but actually it calls itself into question in a lot of ways, right? Like, where it's just like, oh, well, they at least they got the dowry amounts that they wanted when they state them earlier in the novel. So they're set up for life in the way that they want. Like, how romantic, right? But like, and in this, like, you know, now Margarita is with this person who has both said that he wished he was not a writer and he wishes he was not with her. And so it is curious to me, like, what would be revealed later on. Like, I hope that it's like, okay, now that I'm free of these worries, now I can have the things that I've denied that I wanted, but I secretly did. But there's also this shadow concern, I think, of like, who's telling the truth? Like, when is the master telling the truth? I would like to believe that he secretly did want to write and be with her, but
crucially, in the unmasking scene when they're riding through the sky, Margarita sees the master and is struck by how beautiful he is in his own transformed shape. Yeah. But we never get to see the opposite.
Yeah.
I think it's also telling that, like, he knows his novel by heart now. Like, he doesn't need the manuscript anymore. Like, he is the manuscript. And so, like, as parts of Moscow at least, burn while the Master and Margarita, you know, go off into limbo, I think it's this idea of renewal as well. And so, like, they've kind of transcended the need for these physical things. So I think that when he says that he doesn't want to write anymore and he doesn't want Margarita to be with them, he's trying to save Margarita from his same fate, not understanding that they're inextricably linked and that there is no severing that tie between them. And so I don't think he's saying that because he truly wants it. I think he's saying it because he wants to save whatever he can. He doesn't want to bring Margarita down with him. So I think ultimately, like, he will continue to write, unlike, you know, Ivan the poet, who won't write, is like a failed disciple. I think he will. I think it's more cheer. I'm going to tell you right now, guys, like, this is the happiest ending of a Russian novel ever. So, like, I think it's happier than other people, than some interpretations might lead you to believe.
I did sort of, I guess, like, I had my feelings and then I started calling them into question, and then I was like, no, I like the ambiguity of it. Like, I really enjoy that about it, but I do like that I do want it to be the thing that I do want it to be the thing, but I do like that he leaves in this sort of doubt. But again, like, they are no longer, I mean, like, if they're no longer if cowardice is no longer a specter, like, if they have managed to transcend cowardice, then perhaps they have the best possible shot at happiness that, like, we could hope for. But I don't know. Yeah. It's this quill pen, which sounds like a drag to me, but, like, I don't know. Like, that's fine. Like, we all have our tools that we like the best, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add, but yeah, what an ending.
I know. What a whole book. Like,
I mean, there's only, I guess, one more thing is there is a movie that was made of the Master and Margarita in Russia.
Oh, wow.
That came out earlier this year, in January of this year. I have not seen it. Understandably, it has not found an American distributor. But when it was released in Russia, it was a huge hit. Like, everybody went and saw it. But it was directed by a man named Mikhail Bulgakov, and he was born in the Soviet Union. No, I'm sorry. I think he was born in the United States. He went to the Soviet Union as a child because his father immigrated to the Soviet Union. He lived in Russia for a long time, and then he came back to the States. And the Russian news pundits, like, think about like Fox News, but now transfer it to Russia. have actively called for the director, Lakshin, have called for him to like be extradited back to Russia and to be arrested and to be thrown in jail for making this movie, because they see it as like anti-government. And he has come out himself. Yeah. So he himself has come out and said like, when I was directing this movie, I was a very anti-Putin story. And so I think it's interesting that like now, so many years later, it's not only being like, we can use the Master and Margarita to critique our own government, but like it's also being used to critique Putin and Russia's government right now as well. And so like the stories, I don't know, it's just like the immutability of this story just keeps on going, and it can't, like, manuscripts truly don't burn.
Yeah.
And like Bulgakov will always continue to speak out against authoritarian regimes. So I just thought that was really interesting. I kind of did a long read about Lakshin and like how he related to the text and how he transformed this movie for like modern audiences. So like I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, especially like updating it too. That's awesome.
Yeah. So.
Right. Well, just wanted to say thanks to both of you guys again for coming on the show. Yeah, Molly, always a pleasure.
Yeah,
Melissa, we'll definitely have to have you on again sometime. Do you guys have anything you want to plug before we call it a day?
Yeah, anything you want the listeners to check out?
Well, for me, I have a novella coming out next year called In Side by Side They Wander. It's an art heist in space, sort of far future ragtag crew, that also has a lot of sort of like AI thoughts and sentiments in it. The cover will be released later this month. I think 8/26 is when it's going to hit social media. I don't know when this podcast will come out, but sometime around then, I'm assuming. But I'm really excited about it. That'll be out in May next year, and so I'll mention that.
That's awesome.
Wonderful.
I have a novel. It's a weird one. It's called Star-Crossed: The Confounding Calamities of Byron the Cat and Mariana the Zombie. It's pretty old, but like Bulgakov, it takes me centuries to write books. So. But yeah, that's
very relatable.
Yeah, it's very relatable.
Is that under MK Sauer or?
It is under MK
cool.
Sauer. Yeah, thank you.
I know. I forgot this wasn't like a live feed. I actually brought my copy to like show off, but I know this is just a cost. But I did because and Melissa also has a story in Swords v Cthulhu, which is like an older anthology that I co-edited. And so I had them both ready, and then I was like, wait, this is an audio medium. Never mind. I don't have to have books like sitting right here. But, I'm so pilled by all those book talks where like I should be tapping my fingernails on the cover.
That's like Bulgakov ASMR. This is our $1 million idea, guys.
I know. It'll be good.
All right. Well, Molly, thanks again for suggesting we pick this up, because I was telling Ben before we started, like, this has been one that has been sitting on my shelf for like the better part of probably a decade.
Yeah.
And I would walk by it and be like, oh, if I just like picked that up now and started reading it, I'd probably love it. And then I would not do that. I'd go read something else.
Yeah.
So who knows how long it would have taken otherwise.
Well, I'm glad that I finally picked it up too, because I've known Melissa for a long time and I knew it was her favorite book. And last year I ended up reading We by Yevgeny
Zamyatin.
Thank you. And I enjoyed that very much. And then I was like, oh, I should keep going, and picked up Master and Margarita. And it was around the time that I was on your podcast last year. And I was just like, this is great. So I'm glad this gave me the impetus to go back to it after a long break. And because this has been on my list for a while too. And I can understand why people say it's their favorite book. I think I'm definitely going to be thinking about this one for like probably the rest of my life, which is always like a good sign with a novel in my thoughts. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, listeners. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with last episode of our summer season on Libra by Don DeLillo. Until then, stay cool. Don't sell your soul to the devil, and Semper Books.
Semper Books.
Separate books.
Semper Books.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.